business. This is an update on the discussion regarding Governor Lee's Executive Order number 55, TSSAA's regulations and other factors regarding contact sports. Barnett, did you have anything to start us off, or?
You know, we've all received a lot of feedback from student athletes, from parents, from both sides of this. So there's no doubt in my mind of what the Academy, you know, American Academy of Pediatrics recommendations and what comes through pediatricians in our community about the importance of in-person school and also athletics. I guess, you know, it comes down to some choices that parents are going to need to make and we're going to have to make as far as safety goes and what we put in place at our school level to do everything we can do to make practice safe. You know, we started with this as well way back in the summer, probably late spring, early summer, and Mr. Turner was on calls with us as superintendents. We do a regional Zoom call, and I feel like our region really led the way as far as putting those procedures in place. TSSAA guidance that came out as far as crowd size is probably a little more structured than what we've had in place, and that calls for smaller crowd sizes than half. It's really 1/4 or 1/3 of the students there. You know, some of the feedback we've gotten or opinion we've had has been, almost all of it has just been very polite, very positive, very well written, well thought out, and just so, you know, please consider this. And that just impresses me, and I think it says a whole lot about our community. You know, I shared with somebody the other day that my father-in-law always, because forever I've always said I get to go to work. I get to go to work. And he said, "You still get to go to work?" And I said, "Yeah, I do." Because our community cares about each other. They care about their own children. They care about everybody else's kids. And everything that was written was out of love for children and care for one side or the other of very difficult decisions that we're having to make. In-person schooling and athletics, all those things. Everybody that writes those, they're either desperate because it's really hard to find childcare, and I totally get that. Or it's just hard to have your kids and try to work. But also with the athletics, this is out of that love and desire for us to be able to have everything for our kids that we want them to have. I don't know if that helped, but that's all.
We have had a lot of communication, and you know, it's a tough decision, and I have mixed feelings about a lot of it. But one of the places I don't have a lot of mixed feelings about is limiting the crowd size. I know there's other schools that have decided to only let immediate families of the players in the stadium, players and band, and I think that is one way we can do the responsible thing and not try to make community spread even worse by getting 3,000 people together. So I'd like to make a motion that we can let fall sports continue, but that we limit crowds to just immediate families of the players and any supported like band or cheerleaders.
Before there's consideration for a second, that's all you said, fall sports. Would you, do you, because the only thing we've discussed is contact sports.
You're right. Okay, so let's say contact sports. Let me change that to contact sports. And I'd also like to add the caveat until, you know, if our numbers drop considerably, then we change. Right now, at this point in time, I just can't imagine letting 3,000 people together in the stadium buying popcorn.
So there's a motion. Is there a second? Okay, motion dies for lack of a second.
I'd like to make a motion that we allow football and soccer, just to be specific, that's what we're talking about right now, like you said at the beginning of the meeting, that we allow those sports to continue. I can comment more on why if we get a second, but just to see if we want to discuss that. I'll second that. So,
Just for clarification, would that be to allow those sports to continue consistent with the
Yes.
safety plan
with
that
what
we heard
last
presented
night,
last
yes,
week?
with all the precautions and safety plan and everything that we heard Wednesday night, with all of that.
And no desired modifications?
No, I felt
Just as
comfortable with
presented.
what I heard Wednesday night.
Okay, is that consistent with your second?
Yes.
Okay.
And does that include the crowd size?
What they said on the crowd size,
What
which
they
was,
said was a little bit different than TSSAA. They said 50%, I think TSSAA says
It's either,
25 to 30.
25 to 1/3.
part of their
Quarter to a third.
the key that I liked out of the plan for the football was they were only gonna do numbered seats. I mean, your ticket had your seat on it. And so with that, you know, families might sit together, but family wouldn't sit right next to another family. And they would monitor that through the actual seat assignments. And we hope that people honor their seat assignments.
So, Mr. Turner, remind us what the plan provides for.
Well, it's actually less than 50%. It's probably, lower,
Could you
lower
come up to the
forties.
microphone so people at home can hear?
When you look at the configuration of stadiums, you can look at standing room, you can look at the banks, you look at the number of people that ETSU was able to put in our stadium when they played there. With some modifications, our attendance could be up to 8, 9, 10,000. We're going with anywhere between 3,000 and 3,500, with 2 seats in between each family, and 95% of the time there's nobody sitting in front of anybody. That could happen if a family chose to do 2 seats here, 2 seats here, front to back. We have looked at that over and over since spring. I do know that there are some schools that are going with the 50% capacity, and I've seen the actual written email where the TSSAA said that was okay. And someone with a much larger stadium capacity than ours. Historically, with our stadium, the first 2-3 games are very well attended. Then after that, it's not an issue. I expect the same thing with our schedule that we have this year, that the first couple of games will be maxed on what we allow, and then after that, I don't see it being an issue. We are going to mark off, try to have every seat assigned so that you can control that better instead of just selling a ticket and having them go. We're going to have caution tape in the areas where they're not supposed to sit. We've got signage, we've got temperature checks, we've got hand sanitizers. We're going to have extra custodians in the bathrooms. So we feel confident in our plan. Does that guarantee that somebody doesn't, have it? No, it does not. I'm not going to tell you that. But we feel like we have a plan in place. We've dealt with it, and many schools have dealt with it. And we look at it like graduation. You do everything you can to possibly have it. And then if you can't, at least our students know we did everything that we could to try to make that happen.
I have no doubt, you guys have done a great job planning, and I'm not disagreeing with that. I am disagreeing with having 3,000, 3,500 people gather at this point in time. And it doesn't make me feel better that it's, when our numbers are the highest is when we're gonna have the biggest crowds, and then it might dissipate.
What's the actual seating capacity of the stadium?
Right now, without bringing any bleachers in there at all, would be about 7,500. That's not counting the bank, which we're looking at that for some special circumstances, where we can isolate some people that may have some issues that really, like grandparents that really want to come and don't need to be around anybody. We're sort of, doing that there, but we can bring in a lot more down on the end zones and separate them. But like with the student section, for example, that we are planning, we've got about 350 tickets that we could sell for students. That would be one here, 2 seats in between, and one here, and nobody behind it. Now, getting them to stay in that's gonna be the administration's job, but I feel like in the last few weeks, I think our students are sort of taking it a little bit more serious. I've seen a lot of chatter between our teams and stuff about them, taking ownership and, just tell them, put your mask on, do this, do that. So.
Really, this is not anything
No,
about
I
lack
know.
of plan, and I wish we could have a lot of people there. If I vote not in support of this motion, it's not about the playing of the game, it's about the crowd.
We've received a lot of phone calls, texts, emails over the last week and a half, and I would guess 80 to 100. Many of us received the same ones, and I can only remember one that was not in support of having fall sports. And at our call meeting last week, Mr. Turner and Coach Carter did a great job of presenting the plan, the procedures, and I was extremely impressed. We're going over and above the state mandate in many of these procedures. But I wasn't surprised because Johnson City School System, we do things excellent. Everything in all that we do. And I believe that their plan can work, and I think we need to try to give it a chance. These kids deserve it. They've been through a lot, and I would really like for us to try and give it a chance to have fall sports, particularly.
Yeah, and like you, I read through all those emails, which I'm sure you did also. There's a lot of them, but we read through them all, we listened to them, paid attention to it. But even regardless of that, with something outside, I just don't have the same concern as something where you're locked in the same airspace in a classroom. And yes, it's contact, but there's something to be said for mental health and the other things that go along with football. Football allows, band to have a reason to do things and other things like that. And, it could be in our protocols if we end up getting some positives that, maybe it does get shut down for a week or two or something. That's in the
It is in our
protocol.
As an individual.
Yeah, and so that could be the reality. That's all the more reason for people to really adhere the best they can to the masks and all the social distancing and to stay in their seat that they're supposed to and all that kind of stuff. But I just don't see, there's a balance there that there's so many downsides to not doing it. I'd rather we go ahead and do it.
To me, limiting crowd size is doing everything we can to make sure that football can continue, because I think the more community spread we have, the more chances are it's going to shut down. And if we're really doing this for the kids and the athletes, it's about the kids and the athletes.
Another thing that we talked about at that meeting was the possibility of live streaming big sports, so we could limit the number of people currently at the game, presently at the game, but also others could be engaged, whether they're at home or wherever watching it. So that's something, again, we talked about it on Wednesday, but I would really encourage us to pursue that.
I've got a meeting Wednesday at 9 o'clock with people that are going to be able to make that happen pretty easily in the stadium for football. It's more difficult with the other ones, but we can use the same format as we did for graduation with football.
But it could be an avenue that, not just with sport, but it could be any type of musical or dramatic performance where people could still be engaged by viewing this online, and could have that as an ongoing program if we can get it in place.
I think also I appreciate all the parents and community members who emailed and called and texted and all of that, but I also appreciate our student athletes who came here tonight. It's not necessarily fun to sit through one of these meetings, and y'all sat here for an hour and a half now, and I appreciate it. But I recognize a bunch of you because my son's been on teams with a lot of you. We need to look at that. One of the things that scares me the most right now is the CDC saying that, we have a rise in teen suicides and drug overdoses. And although our student athletes are not our entire student population, they're a big part of it. And I would hate for lost opportunities for them, just like I'd hate for lost opportunities for any of our students. And the fact that they have the ability to be outside and do that, I think, is just incredible. And I also think a lot of our community is going to choose not to come to these games. A lot of our older members who've come to games for 70, 50, 60, 70 years, because we do have people who've been here that long, I think they will choose, as long as they have a way to watch it, to not come. And I think some of our older community members will choose to come just because they've never missed a game, even with the risk that they have. So I know it's a huge risk, but it's also, one of the people that sent us email said it's a choice. And I don't have a child who is in football or soccer, but I have a child who's in the band. And I've made the choice to let him go to band practice, which they say could possibly be just as bad as football as far as spreading of that. You know, you don't know what's coming out the end of a horn, although it has to go through a lot of metal to do that. But it's a choice that I've made as a parent. But we also have opted for choices for parents who, for whatever reason, don't want to make that choice. We have options for them too. And I liked that last week that you said it's not going to hurt them if a child sits out a year on a sport. It's not going to hurt them to come back next year because their family, because of whatever reason, immunocompromised elderly family members living with them. I like that we had that in there too. But I think these kids need the opportunity to be outside, to get out. I know what the 6 months lockdown has done to my 3 kids, and it's not been great. So I know getting out and doing has actually been really good for my kids too.
And you don't have a virtual option, so to speak, with the sport. I mean, yes, there's esports, but it's not the same. And it's probably not the same kid playing the physical football and the esports football, so it's not the same. So yeah, it's voluntary. And it'll be a challenge for the coaches, for somebody that is out a year, but I trust and I'm sure that they're going to do everything possible to make it as fair as possible. There's only so many roster spots on some of our sports and that kind of thing, and I get that, but I trust that they're not going to let anybody be negatively affected by making the decision for their health that they've got to stay out because they've got a parent or grandparent at home.
Mr. Hager?
2 questions. What are you going to do about people who want to hang on the fence?
Well, according to Mr. Peterson last week, if we can get additional funding through the CARES Act where we can pay for or possibly get reimbursed for extra security, we will do that. Otherwise, it comes down to funds to be able to do that. And with reduced crowd sizes and all that, we're already going to be pushed. And with that number that we've determined there, that's safe to be in the stadium, if we can average that, then financially we can make it this year. And when I say make it, I don't like to have to come before the board and have to ask for additional funding. I want it to take care of itself. But if we can somehow, that's something we have to determine. And I think he was actually in contact with Coach Carter today talking about some additional stuff that we've done since we met last Wednesday. Take other precautions and some things that we purchased about doing that. But we'll have to, Mr. Hager.
So if you come in the stadium, you're going to go take a seat.
We're selling all assigned seats for us right now. Now that doesn't mean somebody can't stand at the fence, but what if they're standing at the fence by themselves or spread out? That's what we would be looking for.
And the most important question of the moment for me, the motion entails all sports, or?
The motion was for the 2 in question, football and soccer.
What about cross country?
It's not a contact sport, so it's okay. It was only for the contact sports that the Wednesday meeting was called.
I think the public doesn't understand contact sport versus.
So any of them, right? So any of them going on right now that aren't football and soccer are not they're not contact sports and they're okay.
I think the motion should
Be for fall sports.
reflect that.
But that's fine. I don't
Still
know.
have crowd, issues that we have to follow even in volleyball and soccer. They're not as large as football, but we're going to use that same procedure and process in the gym. And then on the soccer game, we're supposed to start soccer and volleyball with their first home events next Tuesday.
So, Mr. Hager, are you making a motion to amend the motion to apply to all fall sports?
Yes.
Okay. So a motion and a second to amend the original motion.
I just don't want there to be any confusion. I've had some people be in touch with me asking, what about this sport or that sport? All we're hearing about is football.
Yeah.
And to be honest with you, until we met last week, I didn't know what contact sport meant. And I've played a few sports. Basketball to me could be a contact sport.
Oh, it is.
It is.
Considered one too.
It's just not going on yet.
Wrestling is a contact sport.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I just think for everybody to understand, all fall sports are a go.
Yeah, and Tom, the only reason I just mentioned this too, because the other two you mentioned their contact just weren't going on yet. So that's what we were just talking about now was the soccer and football.
Is baseball contact?
No, sir. By their definition, International Federation of High School.
Tom's played baseball. I think he thinks different.
So, Coach
They
Turner,
let you play a little rougher back then, too.
Coach Turner, could you just list off what those fall sports entail? And I guess we should include band and mountain biking, which aren't necessarily TSSAA sports, but are also sports that are done in the fall.
Our offerings in the fall, is
Yes.
what you're asking? Football, and then you have soccer, volleyball, cross country, dance, cheer, band, and mountain biking.
Golf.
And then golf. And then right in the middle of sort of the season, swimming sort of starts earlier, and they're governed by a totally different body, but they've been doing a lot of things to be able to have meets and stuff too. That's going to be a limited space. So what Coach Chris has done this summer with the Barracudas is they'll call parents out of the parking lot and let them go in and watch the race or film them because it's a limited space. So they're already used to that when we get to the high school season.
I think we're making some decisions based on dollars, and I'm not sure this is a year to do that. So I just want to go on record and saying we should not do this because of revenue, if that's our only basis. There's a way to make that up for 1 year. I know that our city has asked us to limit crowd size, and I'd be perfectly willing to have us as a board approach the city to help make some of those funds good.
And the flip side of that, I would say, do what you need to keep us safe. Don't let money stop you from doing something. We can't pull it out of thin air, but we'll figure something out. So if it's something that you got to do to keep it safe based on the teams and the crowds, then do it.
I have a comment from Michelle Treese also. Go.
Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Okay, so I would like to have at least some provision written in there about student responsibility. Our meeting last week, I said, even though we are above and beyond the call for guidelines and provisions from different levels, I would love to see that our students sign some type of a pledge saying that they will always be on guard about wearing masks, social distancing, and all that. If we as a staff, if we as school board are following that plan, I really need to see the students step up and do that plan as well. I think I heard one athlete from Libertyville say that she was willing to do that. I would love to see that from all of our students, because if we are going above and beyond the call of duty for this, and they are not, it's going to be a problem. It's it's gonna be a big problem in the end. Thanks.
So the
Mr. Turner, do you have any response to that?
I mean, if that's what you asked, that's an easy thing. We've got many forms on our Dragonfly, don't we? And we can add that one to it. It's a pledge. I mean, we ask them to take a hazing, they sign a thing for hazing, they sign a thing, for bullying, so that's an easy addition. And, since our meeting last Wednesday, just watching the football players today, I drove down there on purpose just to see. And I noticed a big difference in them today getting out of their cars, and I actually heard some of them yelling at their other teammates, pull up your mask and that sort of thing. So I think the students they're understanding more now than they did. If they want to have a season, they're going to have to do their part even more.
So, Ms. Treese, are you making that comment as a motion to amend the motion to amend?
Don't we have to deal with the amendment motion first that's on the table?
Now you can
I think we can stack
go up the ladder
amendments.
and then go
Right.
down the ladder.
So yes, you're making a motion.
Yes, I am making a motion that we add that amendment, please.
I'll second that one also.
Okay. Is there further discussion on that amendment? We'll go ahead and vote on it, and then we'll get the second amendment, or the first amendment out of the way.
I don't necessarily see the point just because, like Mr. Turner just said, they already get it. And them signing something isn't going to necessarily make them do it any better than if they don't sign it, so I don't see the point.
I think it was a good reminder of we're all in this together and we all gotta do our part.
Is that an easy thing for you to do?
We'll do it. It's easy. We'll do it.
If it's easy, then fine.
I also see, I know how many forms you have to sign as a parent of a student athlete and how many the athletes have to sign. But that shows that these kids that are here can be the leaders in that and make sure that their other team members are doing that. And the people from, the kids from the other teams, the juniors and seniors can take the lead on that and make sure, we have student leaders on each of our teams and band and all of that. So I think those students are the ones who need to be the leaders in making sure that it's happening, but it doesn't hurt to have them sign it just because it kind of makes it a little bit more official.
It's a pledge, that's easy to do.
Right.
I mean, we'll
So-
run copies and have them at practice, and that can be done in a day.
So what happens if somebody doesn't sign it?
What happens if they don't sign one of the other pledges?
We hold them out. For the other stuff, they're mandatory.
So that's what I'm asking the board, is that what we're saying on this, that it's a mandatory thing, if you don't sign it, you don't play?
Ms. Treese's motion, so, Michelle?
I personally think if the other ones have signed pledges for other things like that, this is a big deal. If you sign a pledge that said, I promise not to smoke a cigarette, that impacts you. But if you do not wear your mask and you become COVID positive, that affects the team. That's a big deal to me. Because I have a son playing, so I think if you can have them sign a pledge that I will not do drugs, they can sign a pledge that says I will be responsible for doing whatever they need to do to protect themselves against COVID and their team. It's not just, I think I hear a lot of folks talking about individual students and my child and this particular kid and siblings. I'm looking at the entire team and staff. So I think signing that pledge is a big deal, and I think if they fall short of the pledge, whatever that consequence might be, should stand.
And Michelle, I agree with everything you just said, but it didn't answer my simple question. My simple question was, if they don't sign, do we hold them out from playing?
I believe she said yes.
I think you go by what the coaches do. I'm not the coach. I think that Mr. Turner can tell you exactly what the answer to that is, but if they don't follow the pledge for one requirement, I promise not to do drugs, and there's a consequence, then I think that same consequence should stand.
I have a question. Most of the other forms that we have to fill out are either mandated by the state legislature or board policy. And so there's consequences for not not filling out a drug consent form. There's consequences for not filling out a concussion or bullying. All those are things that, the way I understand it, are mandated by either the board as policy or the state legislature.
I think if we approve the motion, it effectively becomes board policy.
And that's what I was trying to get clarified. Is that part of the motion that they're held out if they don't sign it?
I say yes.
Okay, that's all I was after. Thank you.
Paul, were you the second on the motion? Do you agree with that?
Yes.
Being done, okay. So any further discussion about the amendment to the original motion? Okay, so as I understand it, the motion is that our student athletes will be required, upon penalty of not being allowed to participate, to sign a form that acknowledges their obligations to do everything necessary to protect themselves and their teammates and their coaches from COVID, to include wearing masks, social distancing.
To follow the TSSAA guidelines regarding COVID. I think that would be the
I'm
simplest.
sure there's a document like that already out there somewhere that somebody's got.
So does everybody understand the motion?
The amendment.
Or, right, the amendment, the motion to amend? Okay, I think we'll do a roll call.
Mr. Hager?
Yes.
Ms. Kathy Hall?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson Kane?
Yes.
Ms. Michelle Treese?
Yes.
Ms. Paula Treese?
Yes.
Mr. Robert Williams?
Yes.
Mr. Timberlake?
Yes.
Unanimous.
That was just the form vote.
That was the amendment to the original motion. So now we've got an amendment to the original motion. The amendment to the original motion is to include all fall sports, so that all fall sports would be contemplated by the original motion, which was to permit football and soccer to proceed pursuant to the safety plan that's been put in place.
And my only comment for making the original motion is, I have no problem with this amendment. It's not technically necessary, but I realize people are confused on what sports we're talking about, because even sometimes we accidentally say fall sports when we were really just talking about the contact ones. So that's fine.
So just your little Robert's Rules lessons, we vote on the amendments, and then we vote on the motion as it was amended.
Okay, so any questions or comments about the amendment to the original motion?
Which is making it say all fall sports.
All fall sports.
All fall sports.
Correct. Okay, we'll do a roll call vote.
Mr. Hager?
Yes.
Ms. Kathy Hall?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson Kane?
Yes.
Ms. Michelle Treese?
Yes.
Ms. Paula Treese?
Yes.
Mr. Robert Williams?
Yes.
Mr. Timberlake?
Yes.
Unanimous.
Okay. So now we are to the motion to, as amended, to permit all fall sports to proceed pursuant to the safety plan, the TSSAA guidelines that have been put in place, while also requiring that our student athletes each sign an agreement or acknowledgement that they will abide by the TSSAA rules and the school policies regarding their participation in the sport related to COVID-19. Does everybody understand that motion? What additional comments or questions are there on the motion?
Before Mr. Turner sits down, it's glad to see him standing up. And welcome from where you've been. I know you're very glad to be here.
Yes, sir.
Glad you're here.
So, this backs up a little bit, but it just hit me. We mentioned TSSAA, but we would apply these to even the non-TSSAA sports also. We're just saying we're using their regulations, so swimming in the mountain bike team.
Yeah, I think anything we do at the school level for clubs or that I may not even be in charge of, I think all these guidelines will apply.
Okay.
And marching band, because marching band goes hand in hand with our Friday night football.
And Dr. Vermillion is by my office every day, looking at different things as they change and trying to implement. You know, they've done a very good job.
I do have some comments, but I don't want to cut off anybody else's comments. There's been a lot of conversation about these sports being voluntary, and that's true. But the sports are school sanctioned. And by being school sanctioned, the inherent expectation by the families allowing their children to participate in them is that they are safe. And while there's no question our staff has done a fantastic job putting together our safety plan and going above and beyond the TSSAA rules, there's a fundamental flaw in the idea that by enacting those rules, it's safe. And that flaw is there's no protection for these athletes when they are actually in contact with one another. They are, sharing body fluids. You guys that worked the line, I was a lineman. I know what goes on in there. You're spitting on each other. You're sweating on each other. There's stuff going around. And there's no way to prevent that if the kids are playing like they're supposed to. And so that's a fundamental shortcoming of a plan to protect students participating in contact sports when we have a pandemic going on. And then there's also the aspect of the crowds. And a large crowd, and 3,000, 3,500 people in our stadium is a large crowd. And folks, without us having some really serious security to enforce the rules, will not adhere strictly to the guidelines for protecting one another from potential spread of the virus. I think the last thing any of us would want is for our athletic program to become a hotspot or the source of a hotspot of an outbreak in the community. We all know that I think there are at least 5 high school teams currently that are in quarantine because one or more of their players have tested positive, and those are football teams. That doesn't include other sports that we're aware of that their teams are also in quarantine. So children are contracting the virus, and they're being tested, and their teams are going into quarantine. I think that by us proceeding to allow the contact sports, or I'll just say contact sports because the non-contactor is less concerned to me, that's an inconsistent position for us given the fact that we're currently not allowing our students to be in a classroom and learning. When they're in the classroom, they're going to wear masks, they're going to have social distance, they're going to have dividers, they're going to have hand sanitizer and lots of other protections that won't be available to our athletes when they're on the field. And I think that's very inconsistent. While we have received a lot of emails this last week, probably more than I've ever received in my 13 and a half years on this board, and while most of them were in favor of proceeding with the sports, there was a significant number that I received, I don't know whether they were all sent to you all, that argued against us proceeding as well. So I don't want to leave the impression that we only received comments about proceeding with the sports. I also want to point out that, the NCAA looks like they're not going to have a football season this year. There was reports from over the weekend that the 5, whatever they call them, the 5 major conferences met, and they are likely going to come out with an announcement this week that each of them is going to cancel their football season or push it into the spring. That includes the SEC, the ACC, and lesser conferences. So that gives me great concern, and I'm under the understanding that Dr. Nolan even today said that he is very skeptical that ETSU will even have a season this year of any of their fall sports. So that puts us in an awkward position of there being no collegiate sports being played. The collegiate programs have far more resources and ability to ensure the safety of their players than we do, and yet they're planning on canceling their seasons or moving it into the spring. And finally, I want to bring us back to the numbers. The numbers are not everything, but our community is pretty much on fire with the COVID folks. There is significant spread of the virus within our community. Last week when we were meeting and talking about this, I told you that our hospitals had 95 people who are currently hospitalized at that point. Since that time, this morning, we had 122 people hospitalized with the virus. 17 of those people on ventilators, and we have pediatric patients who actually have the virus. And so, it's while there is risk in everything, that's true. I believe that we have an inconsistent position here. If we approve proceeding with these sports, when we compare that to the fact that our students aren't even in class right now. And so, for all of those reasons, I can't support the motion. It has nothing to do with the quality of the safety program that you guys have put in place. And guys, I want you guys to be on the field. I know how much you want to do that. But I just don't know that it's responsible of us to go ahead and do that at this point. So for that reason, I'll vote against the motion.
I'll make just a technical point, because we added that First Amendment that I wasn't wild about, that further complicates if this gets defeated. And I think we'll have to reconsider the non-contact ones to fall, because now they're all lumped together and we would be saying no to all of them, and I don't think that's really what we want to say.
And we can always do another motion.
Right, so keep that in mind, if this does get defeated.
Sure. Other comments or questions?
There are several I can make. Part of what you said I agree with. We have a governing body, the TSSAA, who has an opportunity to do some of the things you said. They have decided not to do it. The NCAA, for whatever reason, they may decide, they may not decide. So again, we've been put in the position of doing what, in my opinion, the TSSAA should have done. They haven't done it. So we're here tonight discussing and voting on what we're discussing and voting on.
Other comments or questions? All right, we'll have a roll call on the motion. Is everybody clear on the motion? Yes. All right, Ms. Bird?
Mr. Tom Hager?
Yes.
Ms. Kathy Hall?
Pass.
Mr. Jonathan Kenneth?
Yes.
Ms. Michelle Treese?
City? Yes.
Ms.
Yes.
Paula Treese?
Yes.
Mr. Robert Williams?
Yes.
Mr. Timbalall?
No.
Ms. Kathy Hall?
With great reservation, and let the minutes reflect that I have big issues with crowd size, yes.
Motion passed.
Okay.